The last performance I did live with the usual musicians, singers and dancers I performed with was in St. Patrick's Cathedral on March the 12th, 2020. And the day afterwards, a concert that we were scheduled to do, a lot of us, at Symphony Space, an annual concert for the Irish Arts Centre, a Celtic Appalachian celebration, was cancelled. No concerts forthcoming, and off I went, as I usually do at this time of the year, to Bangkok, a city I've been coming to and enjoying for over 21 years now. And the country itself was fairly open at that time. I arrived here on March the 15th. Without my instruments, fully expected to go back for the summer festivals in the Catskills and in the Milwaukee Irish Festival. Then, after a while, it became apparent that none of this was going to happen. Thailand itself locked down and has been essentially in lockdown now for over 14 months. And I've been here most unexpectedly that time, during that whole time. The first consolation, I suppose, it's something I'd been doing for many years, was going every Sunday morning to the Mercy Centre. It's a place that takes care of street kids in the slums of Bangkok, an area called Doyle. And it's been supported over the years by a number of donors and philanthropists, including the legendary Chuck Feeney, whom I have enjoyed meeting many times over the years in San Francisco. And some years back, I had the idea of maybe introducing some music into the programs that the kids do after school. And it started very modestly. And then with support, first of all, from Terry Miller, an ethnomusicologist from Kent State, Professor Emeritus from Kent State University, an expert in Southeast Asian music and a person who's become a great friend. With his support in buying extra instruments, and then when the mighty Donny Carroll, the Corkman of the Year in New York on more than one occasion, when he came and saw the Mercy Centre, we started to do fundraisers and have been doing so now for a decade, and raising money from a lot of very generous people in New York and in other parts of America and indeed beyond, to support an ever-growing orchestra, we would call it now, where all the kids are involved at the Mercy Centre. They're all street kids. They've gone through unimaginable horrors on their way to living at the Mercy Centre. It represents the gold standard of how to take care of children in need, the poorest of the poor. And to our delight, they started to get really into the music and the dancing, and not just any particular kind, the traditional music, particularly of the northeast of Thailand, and the ancient, venerable, beautiful classical music traditions. We were able, through our concerts in New York, to fund some of the best teachers who made a major commitment to the kids, and to go there on a Sunday morning and watch them practice in little groups, and then come together to do their music and dance programs was absolutely exhilarating. And it was something that started to happen Sunday after Sunday. And I started to get to know the kids on an individual basis in a way that I'd never had really the chance to do before. It's always such a joy to watch them, first of all rehearsing and practicing, and then performing. Well, here I am today in the usual Sunday morning practice session. And I thought today what I would do would be to bring you around to the different little groups that practice at different levels and different instruments, both music and dance. The music would be classical and traditional Thai music, and the dance would be associated with those traditions as well. And they break up in little groups. They meet at 8 a.m. every Sunday morning with their wonderful teachers. And they're all highly qualified and very committed to coming out here to the most I suppose, the most dangerous part of Bangkok and the history of slums now is not as dangerous as it used to be. It's changed. Things have progressed since the first time I came here 20 years ago. But the music and dance program is a very important part of the activities of the Children Weekly. It's one of the few times they all come together. They go to different schools, different levels, and one of the first things they do when children enter an institution like this, usually because they've fallen through all the cracks of society, is that the institution prepares them immediately for leaving the institution from day one, even though they're cared for in an exemplary way. They're taught and trained not to be dependent on the institution. A kind of what they call institutional dependency can prevent personal and community progress. So today I'm going to take you around to the different groups that are practicing at different levels. Later they will all come together. As the world now knows, the appalling murder of George Floyd happened on May the 25th, 2020. I, along with just about everybody else I know, was appalled beyond belief at the murder itself, but also at the issue of police brutality and systemic racism. Not that this was a new thing, but it was really highlighted in a new way with unprecedented protests, and the story is well known at this point. Being in lockdown on the other side of the world, of course I felt a sense of helplessness, but then I thought, well, you know, we can be connected in a new and a novel way. And Zoom had started, and other ways of communicating from afar had been underway for a little bit. And I started to contact Irish musicians, mostly in America, musicians, singers and dancers, and asking them if they would be interested in making a collective statement of solidarity with our brown and black brothers and sisters, and the indigenous people in America too, to show how appalled that we were and are at racism in whatever way it manifests itself. And to my total delight, over 36 musicians, singers and dancers said, we'd love to make a statement. The question is how we would do it. Well, enter an old friend of mine, Roy Esmonde. He's a very distinguished filmmaker, has been in documentary film for over 50 years. We've known each other going back to the 1960s. And almost in desperation, I called up Roy and asked him for some technical advice on how to do this and how to put it all together. And Roy said, look, I'll do it. And I said, do you know what you're getting into? He said, well, I'll learn soon enough. And he did. And to all our delight, on the 24th of June, a program aired called Infinite Hope. I'd like to thank my fellow musicologist and banjo driver Dan Neely for suggesting that famous Martin Luther King term. We used Infinite Hope to bring ourselves together in solidarity, making a statement against racism in whatever form that it might occur. And it was wonderful to see people, who perform in non-verbal art forms like playing jigs and reels and hornpipes, instrumental music, or dancers coming together with people who have songs with lyrics that lend themselves more easily, I suppose, to the genre of protest. I co-hosted with Leni Sloan, my great African, American and Irish. He'd been my blood brother, I suppose. We've been doing a program together called Two Roads Diverge now for nearly 25 years in different parts of America and beyond, on the theme of racism. And Leni and myself co-hosted. And here's what I said then and what I still believe on the subject of Irish Americans and Irish people and racism. After I came to America in 1973, I lived in Philadelphia for the next 30 years, and 28 of those years I spent in Germantown, an overwhelmingly African-American part of the city. And I saw the daily sight of white motorists rolling up the windows in their cars and locking the doors when they were driving through the hood. I became familiar with the daily indignities suffered by young black men, how when they went to a supermarket, they were often followed around by security guards, observing their every movement. Their mothers would tell them always to be sure and get a receipt for everything they bought, and always have ID with them wherever they went. The list of daily indignities went on and on. I must say I enjoyed those 30 years immensely and was awed by the humour, warmth, and in particular the patience and tolerance of my African-American neighbours. In the early 1990s, I made my first trip to Montserrat, which is often known as the Emerald Isle of the Caribbean, and I was fascinated about that. I was curious about the Irish identity that the island was known for in general. And then when I went, I learned that most of the people there had Irish names and that we Irish had become slave owners there after originally being transplanted forcibly to the West Indies as indentured servants as far back as the 17th century. I learned that the so-called Black Irish of Montserrat were mostly not Irish at all, but African Caribbean people who had taken their Irish names from their masters because they had no English names of their own. There are those recently who, for their own reasons, have equated the suffering of the Irish transplanted by the likes of Oliver Cromwell to the Caribbean for indentured servitude to the suffering of Africans in slavery. But while we may have suffered the same indignities and sufferings, only our labour was sold, never our bodies. In slavery, as we know, the whole body and progeny of the body became the property of the slave owner. That never happened to us. During my many visits to Montserrat, I met the distinguished historian Howard Fergus, and he makes this point as well. He wrote this book, The History of the Island of Montserrat, and I'd like to quote from him on the chapter that is titled Irish and African Emancipation. There was really no comparison between the horrors of black slavery and the discrimination against Irish Catholics in Montserrat, but both groups in their different ways hankered after freedom. The slaves needed basic personal liberty, while the Irish always struggled for civil and political equality with other whites. The latter achieved their goal 6 years before emancipation, but this was no more the fruit of human kindness than was emancipation purely the result of humanitarian action. Freedom. We both longed and still long for freedom and social justice, basically an even playing field for all. We Irish Americans of all people have absolutely no right whatever to be racist at any time. We must not forget that not too long ago, we newly arrived Irish, along with African Americans, were considered by the American establishment, the wealthy and the powerful, as barely human. In fact, as subhuman. Irish Americans, of course, are now part of our privileged establishment in the United States, but we must never cease to remember the struggle our forebears went through when they arrived in the land of liberty. The next thing that happened after Infinite Hope was that I was commissioned by Rachel Gilkey, the programming director of the Irish Arts Centre, to do a weekly series of songs or tunes with a story about the context or the history of the song. And I said, sure, I'd love to do that, and it will keep me occupied in this indefinite period of lockdown and enable me to perform with musicians all over the world in a way that might not even be possible if I were living in New York. So off I went, and I did two of them. And then on the 2nd of October, I got hit by a runaway pickup truck, and it broke my hip in two places and damaged my right leg so badly that I couldn't walk for 3 months. So I was on crutches for the next 3 months, but luckily my hands weren't affected and the head seemed to be working okay. So it didn't stop me at all, and I didn't feel I had any right to complain given the alternative possible consequences. The trouble was that I didn't have any of my instruments with me. This banjo here, the old Vega banjo, my trusted Vega, which I've had for over 30 years. I played it occasionally on stage, but left it here in Bangkok for the most part. But I had no other instruments that were professional in the sense that I'd ever played them on a stage or would ever want to play them on a stage. But I assembled them and made my peace with them. There were 2 octave mandolins. The one on the far left there was sent to me by Tom Cusson from Clarnbridge, County Galway. He's a great maker of banjos, but he also sells other instruments. And I called him up and said, help. So he sent me an octave mandolin made in Portugal. The one beside it is an octave mandolin made over 15 years ago in Vietnam on Music Row in Ho Chi Minh City, which is a copy, a $40 copy of a very expensive instrument made by George Abrahams, a luthier in New Hampshire. And then the instrument right in the middle there is a mandolin made in China, which Tom also sold me some years back, and I brought it here to Bangkok just to play around the house. Beside that is a guitar I bought in November here in Bangkok, a Takamine guitar made in Japan. And on the right-hand side is the guitar I bought a good many years ago, just leave it around the house to play. And it's from Korea. It's a Fina guitar. So you have a guitar from Portugal, a guitar from Japan, a mandolin from China, an octave mandolin from Vietnam, and another octave mandolin from Portugal, a veritable League of Nations of instruments. Well, the song that I've chosen to sing for this particular project, Grasta, or Grace Under Times of Uncertainty, is a song called Erin's Green Shore, and it belongs to the genre that's known in Irish poetry and in song likewise as the ashling genre. The ashling means a dream, and it's a dream vision. The poet or the songwriter falls asleep and then has a dream where he's visited by a beautiful woman, and the woman is in bondage, in trouble. And it's a symbol of Ireland, the motherland, being held in bondage under colonial rule, under oppression. And that's described symbolically in the song. And then the poet or the songwriter wakes up and the woman is gone, but the message remains. In a sense, of course, this whole lockdown has been a dream, like a dream, certainly for me, removed from all the people that I normally perform with, and yet managing remotely to connect with them all and to enjoy the beauty of folk music and traditional music and dancing woven in whenever appropriate. Erin's Green Shore is a song that I learned I can't remember who I learned it from. Back in the 1990s, I believe, and I recorded it not long after that for an album called Far From the Shamrock Shore. I don't remember singing it at all since then, maybe once or twice. There's nothing I love more than harmony singing. And this song lends itself to harmony. It's a song found in the Irish tradition. It's also found a lot in the Appalachian tradition, particularly in Virginia. And it's one of those powerful songs that is imaginatively relevant in every generation. And as the late Mike Seeger once said, you know, every time you sing an old song, by definition, it's a contemporary song because you're singing it now, in the here and now. And there's nothing I love more in the here and now, and have loved in my lifetime of being an artist. There's nothing I love more than harmony singing. And I did it back in the days of the Johnstons, back in the 1960s. And I'm delighted to sing this song with two great harmony singers, two great lead singers as well. John Doyle in Asheville, North Carolina, and Liz Hanley in Boston. And we're going to be accompanied by one of the greatest fiddlers ever in the Appalachian tradition, a man I've known and admired for many, many decades. And we performed together, recorded together over the years. And it's Bruce Molsky, and I believe he's recording this in New York. So with Bruce Molsky on the fiddle and with John Doyle on harmony vocals and Liz Hanley on harmony vocals, Erin's Green Shore. One evening of late as I rambled on the banks of a clear purling stream, I sat down on a bed of primroses, and I gently fell into a dream. I dreamed I beheld a fair female, her equal I have ne'er seen before, as she sighed for the wrongs of her country, as she strayed along Erin's green shore. I went to her and I quickly addressed her, fair maid, will you tell me your name, and why through this wild wooded country, in the midst of these dangers you came? I'm a daughter of Daniel O'Connell, and from England I have lately come home. I have come to awaken my brethren who slumber on Erin's green shore. Her eyes were like two sparkling diamonds, or the stars on a bright frosty night, and her cheeks were like two blooming roses, and her teeth of the ivory so white. She resembled a goddess of freedom, and green was the mantle she wore, around by the shamrock and roses, as she strayed along Erin's green shore. In transports of joy I awoke then, and found I had been in a dream. For this beautiful damsel had fled me, and I long for to slumber again. May the heavens above be her guardian, for I know I shall see her no more. May the sunbeams of glory shine o'er her as she strays along there.